Hello everyone, welcome to episode 2 of our Captain's Compass series on data roles. In this episode, we're going to cover analytics engineers. It's going to be a really great episode. If you missed episode 1 and it was on BI Analyst, just click the card above. You can get started with episode 1, come back to episode 2. I promise it'll still be here when you get back. If you like this content, make sure you leave a like and subscription so you can be up to date whenever episode 3, 4, and 5 comes out. And without further ado, let's dive into episode 2 of Captain's Compass.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Julia Salinas, and I work as an analytics engineer for Construct Connect. My company makes software products for the pre-construction industry.
Unless you're going to say that connects like the old toys that we used to have as kids, and that would have been a really cool job, right?
Right.
So can you kind of talk about? So I know like analytics engineering is kind of a newer role. So can you kind of talk about like your data career so far and how you kind of ended up where you are now?
Yeah. So my career in data started at a nonprofit that used solely on-prem infrastructure, and I had a fantastic manager at that job who taught me SQL, taught me all the basics of working in the data industry. And also because of like the baseline skills and knowledge that I gained at that job, I was able to move on to a private company where I was first introduced to EBT and the modern data stack. So when I first heard of the role analytics engineer, I very quickly learned that it was the role for me, and it was the one that I had been articulating in my mind without having an exact definition to go with it.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that answer. So we're going to start back from the beginning. So you started off with the nonprofit. So before you were at the nonprofit, did you go to like a boot camp? Did you do like a university? Did you just teach yourself?
Yeah, not at all. I mean, I was in progress with my MBA during the time I started at that nonprofit, but wasn't focusing on data. Didn't know I was interested in data until I got into that first data specialist role, which then grew from there to data analyst. So yeah, I just got really lucky in what I was able to be taught on the job.
Sure. So what kind of made you take that jump? I know like I was in an MBA program for a while, and there's a lot of different paths you can go on there. So what kind of made you take that jump to take that initial data job that you did?
Yeah, I think it just made sense for me as a person. I was always that kid, on road trips, like doing Sudoku puzzles, doing like logic puzzles in the backseat. And I think that data analytics and analytics engineering is basically the adult equivalent of that. So just for like-minded people like that, if you're looking for a job that fits you, I think analytics engineering might be your place.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then so transitioning between your first job at the nonprofit doing on-prem stuff, and then now you're obviously working in the cloud. There's obviously a big difference between working between kind of the two infrastructure setups. So do you prefer one of the two? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think most of us prefer the cloud, just for every reason. Yeah, I mean, it was a good starting place to begin on-prem. I kind of learned like the basics and like just other methods of, just storing data and data production. But ultimately, like the future is going towards the cloud, and that's just how technology is progressing. So that's how technology works, right? Like we progress on and we learn new things and we learn better ways to do things. So yeah, I'm happy with where I am now for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then you mentioned that, analytics engineering was like the job for you, like you realized that. So what kind of, like, when did that bulb go off? Like, why did it go off? Like, what, why do you think that?
Yeah. So I think in my job as a data analyst, I was looking for a role that was more in between that like data engineering side and more like kind of IT-ish side of data, and then the actual like analytical side. So like producing reports and providing them to stakeholders. And analytics engineering is like smack dab in the middle of those. And so, yeah, it was like the perfect combination for me.
But I just talked to a data engineer yesterday. We kind of talked about what he thought the differences between data engineering and analytics engineering is. And so I'd like to kind of toss that question to you as well. Like, what do you think kind of is the differences between data engineering and analytics engineering?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm curious what they said as well, but in my mind, at least, having never been a data engineer myself, I picture it as being more like setup of the data infrastructure, more like configurations on the back end, more like kind of like using Python to configure everything, the whole setup. And then analytics engineering, I see more in that like middle ground of data ingestion, data transformation, cleaning, just like calculations for finance, calculations for go-to-market systems, and then producing those like end models for the analysts to use in reporting.
Yeah, no, I mean you're pretty spot on with what his answer was as well, where he was kind of like data engineers. They have to handle kind of the infrastructure work and then sometimes like setting up the things more versus the analytics engineer gets to do more of the modeling work. So like, a lot of the work can overlap depending on the organization, right? But like the analytics engineer's main task is modeling versus the data engineer's probably is more building the infrastructure to allow the data to actually live in a good place, right? Yeah. So which is interesting. I mean, I think both the jobs are interesting, but I think they're definitely different. Which is something that I'm learning through these conversations is that kind of before I started these conversations, I was like, well, they're basically the same. Like one of them just like has a fancier title, like all that. But I think I think if you made a good point, the analytics engineering is like kind of that middle ground between the data engineering, which can be more like I think leans more technical, right? Like I think it leans more technical, and then the analytics engineer has to know more business context, right? Like I think has to understand kind of what the analysts are looking for to like make sure those models can actually hit where they want. Yeah. So in your job as an analytics engineer, like what we've seen at Shipyard when we talk to teams is there's a lot of silos, especially between like the data engineering kind of data prep team, I guess we'll call it, and then like the actual like dashboard like analysts, like machine learning people. So in your job, how do y'all like bridge the gap between like y'all and the analytics engineering, the data engineers, and then like the actual analysts that are preparing like using the data for the business stakeholders?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my company, I work in the finance department specifically, and I think that we do a really good job of maintaining, or not maintaining. I think we do a really good job of like not falling to that silo mentality. So we have like actually twice a week meetings with the analysts and with like my entire team, which includes like the developers who set up the configurations. And we might call them a different title, but they're still like doing the same like data engineering type of role. And so, yeah, we are kind of always just like working together. We're always doing like making sure that if the analyst needs something done, then like everyone is aware of what's going on so that if someone has context that someone else is missing, we can make sure that we get that done the whole way through.
Yeah, so whenever you're talking and working with the business stakeholders in the business, like we read an article at Shipyard a few weeks ago that kind of talked about like you get like so many requests from your business stakeholders, and you kind of have to choose. You have to prioritize which ones you work on, right? Because you don't. If we had unlimited time, we'd love to build all the models, but we don't have unlimited time. So you have to kind of pick which one. You got to pick and choose which ones you're going to do. So how do y'all do that? So like how do y'all choose? Like if you had 10 requests come in, how do you sequence those out, and like how do you prioritize them?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, we use like a ticketing system through Jira just to keep track of the requests that we do have. And then my team, my like data analytics team, we meet daily in the morning to just like go through what we have going on for each of us. And then at that point, we can prioritize and say like, okay, this one is a higher priority because it involves someone else's quarterly goal, or no matter what it may be, just to make sure that we're working on what we need to be.
Sure. No, yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's a fight that whenever I was back in industry, that was a fight that we used to get into. We wouldn't have those daily meetings. We might meet once a week or once every 2 weeks. And so you set that priority, 2 weeks ago, and that priority shouldn't be the top priority anymore. And that can rub some people the wrong way for sure.
I mean, also, I will say, like, my team is fully remote. We see each other like once a quarter in person, but that said, it is the most like involved and just the most involved team that I've been on ever. We work in such an integrated way, and we're always communicating with each other to make sure that we're all on the same page. So even though it is like a remote job, it is like definitely the most communication that I've encountered so far in my career.
So you mentioned that you kind of have a daily stand up where you kind of talk and reprioritize and do things like that. So past that daily stand up, what does your day-to-day life look like as an analytics engineer?
Yeah, past that, I think it's mostly just completing my typical tasks of making requested updates or maintaining our data models. And then also like meeting with internal stakeholders to problem solve. So that means like meeting with financial analysts, the product team, others around the business. And then also just like if we have bigger goals for the quarter, focusing some time on that. So, yeah, we like work on our bigger like goals that will take a longer amount of time. But then also I think a majority of the job is really just those, quick one-off development cycles.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you use Jira, you obviously use DBT. Like, are there any other tools that you use on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so we use FiveTran, we use HighTouch, we use BigQuery. Yeah, I mean, when we use it like our CRMs like Salesforce and Zora, Bring Central, MailChimp, stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, and so talking about DBT, so DBT has been a hot topic in the community lately, right? With price changes and things like that. So as an analytics engineer, like you spend a lot of your time in DBT, obviously. So I think it's more interesting, like for me in my career, like I've used DBT like as a big part of my job back whenever I was a data scientist. And that's the only experience I've really had, like working with data and like databases is like using DBT to like model that data. But you've had experiences outside of that. So I guess my question is, in terms of DBT, like a lot of people think of DBT as like just a way to run SQL, right? Like that's, which, allows them to say that it doesn't really provide them that much value, and that can provide like a pretty negative connotation of DBT. But you mentioned that you like working in DBT, and obviously I remember us talking at Coalesce, and you obviously do so can you kind of talk about like the advantages of using DBT versus like writing SQL kind of like in the legacy systems that you were using at your nonprofit?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, DBT just completely changes the game on visibility for the company as a whole. In on-prem services or servers, the way that I've encountered them so far, it's usually just like the one or two data engineers that kind of know what's going on in them. And not talking about any person specifically, but just generally, it's harder to like see in those and know what's going on. But when it comes to DBT, now we have like all this documentation, we have this lineage, and anyone, even if you are not in the data world, if you're not even an analyst, you can look in those docs and see exactly where your fields are coming from, if any transformations are being done on them, any renaming, anything like that. So it just really changes the game.
Yeah, and so whenever we were using DBT at my last organization, we were having not a fight, but we were having a spirited discussion on who should have access to DBT, and like who should be able to actually develop things inside of DBT, because obviously we only had like 3 or 4 data engineers or like data scientists. So they only had 3 or 4 people that like were really qualified to work inside of DBT that were trained. But so that meant that there was 4 of us, which is great, but there was more requests than we could actually do. So business users were like, hey, like we know how to write SQL. Like we can come in and write DBT. Like we can write DBT models. So I guess my question is, like, do y'all allow business users into DBT? Like I know you mentioned that they look at the docs, but like how do y'all kind of make that separation between who can use DBT and who can't?
Yeah. So for developing specifically, right now it's only my data analytics team that does. However, the analysts, absolutely, when they're requesting certain changes, they will write up queries of what they think needs to be changed. And that makes it easier for me in my job, but also helps them like learn what they're doing so that we can get to a point where they can develop if they want to, or they can move into a job like analytics engineering if they're interested in that. And then also I think on that point, just using like version control is very important and something that we do, so that we have like just multiple eyes on any changes that are happening.
Right. No, yeah, that's a smart way of thinking about it, is kind of don't give them the full power to make those changes, but give them the power to be able to do enough that at least they know what's going on and they can help guide you, which I think
Absolutely.
is really helpful. Because if not, like they're just saying like, hey, like I think we need this, but it
Mhm.
doesn't really help you out too much, especially if you have a bunch of different business use cases across the organization.
Yep.
Um, so my next question, I'm going to reshape it a little bit from what I sent to you in our email, but I got pushed back on. I asked, I have a question about, is there any chance of promotion kind of as an analytics engineer? And I got pushed back pretty hard in my last conversation about promotion, because in a data field, there's not much promotion that's there, right? Unless you want to go like be the head of the data team. But that's kind of like whenever I used to be a teacher, where like my chance of promotion was to be a principal. It's not really the same thing, right? It's like more of a job change than it is a promotion. And so I got pressed back on in my last conversation, where he mentioned that, you can get promoted, like you can get pay raises and like grow from like a junior to like a senior kind of analytics engineer. But he changed the conversation more of like, how do I grow as a data individual? So that's how I'm going to reshape the question to you. So I know we've talked about going to Coalesce, and that's obviously like a good learning opportunity, a good networking opportunity. But how else, like on a daily or weekly, I guess, how else in your like professional life do you grow as an analytics engineer? Like, how do you learn new things?
Yeah, I think that just being in the data world in general, like, requires a mindset of like wanting to continually learn. And yeah, when I was thinking about your question about promotion, I also thought along the same lines, like it's less focused on moving up and more just moving into what is right for you at this present time. And so like analytics engineers specifically, like we had the opportunity to move into developer roles. We could become data engineers, data scientists. We could even focus in on like a certain aspect of the business that we're most interested in, and move to a corresponding role there. So like an example of that would be a data quality role for like the go-to-market team, anything like that. Like it's really, the world is your oyster, and it's just up to you and what's right for you and your company at the time.
Yeah, for sure. That's an interesting way to think about it, is, going to where you need to be at that time. Which I think in the data world is really cool, because all of us have skills to do the job that we have, obviously, but most of us all have skills that would like translate into other roles in the data space as well. So, like in this point of your life, you want to be an analytics engineer. Like there might be a time 10 or 15 years later that you want to build dashboards. So go do that, So I think that's an interesting way to think about the data, like the data world in general, is that, there obviously are like thousands of roles now, I feel like, with all these different titles, but if you do well in one of them, you can probably transition with a little bit of learning to do something else and be successful in that one too. So yeah, no, that's interesting. Do you are you in any communities? Like, do you like do any Slack communities? Like, are you active on LinkedIn, like Reddit, like Slack or Stack Overflow? Like, kind of where do you exist kind of in the data community at large?
Yeah, I mean, in the DBT Slack for sure. And then, I mean, I follow and monitor LinkedIn. I'm not as much of an active poster or anything, but I definitely enjoy seeing all of the active members of the data world on LinkedIn for sure. There's just always like new information and new articles, and sometimes it's overwhelming the amount of information there is out there, and you really have to be careful to like pick and choose what is applicable for you and your company. But that said, like people have a lot of great ideas and they're sharing them. So it's good to be involved and just knowing what's going on.
Yeah, we really just have like there's like you said, there's just so much stuff going on. Like, so if you go on LinkedIn and just like scroll through for a few minutes, you're like, wow, like there's like 10 ideas that I could implement, but like, do you have time to implement those? Probably not. And like, what might happen if you do? Yeah, so I'm with you there. It's the same thing for like a vendor for us, where it's like, oh, like look at this other tool that we could integrate with, but it's like there's like 7,000 of those, so it's definitely hard to try to prioritize that. So it's window shopping at a dangerous level, right? Oh goodness. So kind of transitioning the conversation from kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis in your job into like people that are trying to become analytics engineers. So I think it's still a growing field, like the analytics engineering field. I think there's still going to be a ton of openings in that space, just because these companies have all this data. And when I was talking to the data engineer, he talked about how the value that he gains like in his role is not just like preparing the data, but like preparing it in a way that's optimized and can run quickly but also efficiently, so it's cheap on the cloud systems, which is a big deal, right? So for someone that wants to get into analytics engineering, you have an interesting story because you didn't go to like a 4-year university or a boot camp for this specifically, right? So like, what skills do you think they should focus on? I know on LinkedIn I read a post from someone like every other post. It's like learn SQL, like learn Excel, like learn Tableau. But what skills do you really think someone really needs to like start off as an analytics engineer?
Yeah. It's difficult because there are so many skills that could be applicable, but it really, really still boils down to just being willing to learn what is right for your specific role. And obviously SQL, like you definitely, that's a non-negotiable. But yeah, just like having that, this is more like a soft skill, I guess, but having that lifelong learning mindset, because our industry changes so fast and you have to be on your toes, you have to stay up to date with the newest advances, not just in technology, but in methodology as well.
Yeah, I think that's been a common theme across these conversations for me is that, I mean, obviously everyone's like, you need to learn SQL. And like, ironically, like whenever I did my master's program, whenever I was transitioning from teaching, we asked our professors like, hey, like, what do you think we need to focus on in our free time? Like, what do we need to like really shore up here? And he basically was just like, if you know SQL, everything else is irrelevant. Like you can learn the rest of it as you go, but like SQL is the baseline knowledge that you need. And I think that goes for almost any role in the data field, right? Like even if you're a BI analyst, if you know SQL, your chances of getting a job, exponentially go up. So it's interesting. And then like the thing that's kind of been the thread through all these conversations is that soft skill that you mentioned. Like the two things that have popped up consistently in all these conversations is being willing to learn, like being willing to realize that like, hey, I don't know everything that I need to know, and I'm never going to probably, and being okay with that and being willing to pursue knowledge. And then secondly, like, which has came up a lot too, is just like be someone that people want to work with, which I think connects to what you said. But I think we're all like none of us are experts, right? Like all of us are still learning. None of us are perfect. So like, being willing to, have grace and be willing to give grace, like in the situations that we mess up, which happen all the time, right? Like we don't write the best models, or we break a database or break the pipeline, like it happens, right? So it's, yeah. And then if you were, so say you were like the hiring committee, like you were on the hiring committee at your organization and you were going to hire somebody. So I know we kind of already hit on this a little bit, but, assuming that everyone knows SQL, right? Which if they're applying for an analytics engineering job, like they should know SQL and they probably should know how to use dbt core or dbt cloud, right? So if we like take away those things, like what would you like want to look for in an applicant that would say, like say you had 10 applicants, what would make that one person stand apart from the other ones?
Yeah, definitely showing a natural curiosity, and asking questions about different aspects of the data team. And then also just like the company data mesh as well. So because this just like provides the applicant with the information that they need to evaluate whether the company is future looking and provides a space for you to grow, as well as it shows the employer that you understand the nuance and the wide impact that the data team has on companies in this age.
We've been interviewing people at Shipyard, and that's like a big deal that like I didn't really realize, like kind of coming into the field, is like caring about that stuff really matters, right? And it really shows that you care, which is probably more important than actually caring in an interview, right? Like you got to really be able to show that it matters to you versus whether it does or not. So I'm gonna bounce back and kind of end our conversation on this question, which is it's probably my least favorite interview question that people toss at me, but I think it's important. So you've obviously been doing this job for a little bit now. Like, what would you say is probably like your favorite part about being an analytics engineer?
Let's see. There's so many things that I love about it. I think I mentioned it earlier, but the best part about being an analytics engineer for me is basically that my job boils down to solving logic puzzles all day. Like I said, I think it's just part of who you are as a person sometimes, like having that logical minded brain. And like some people are more attuned to liberal arts and like creativity, and some people are more attuned to this. that's not to say that people that have that type of brain can't work in the data world, but I think it just has become just the great fit for me because of how my brain works and how I think.
Yeah, and I would even argue that like what you're saying almost connects with the people that kind of do the liberal arts and like the artsy stuff, right? Where like I think analytics engineering, like whenever I got to do like that part of the job, especially back at the nonprofit that I was working at, like we were like trying to develop star schemas and stuff. And I think there's like an art to that, right? Like I think there's, like obviously like I can't draw or sing or do anything like naturally artsy, but like I think if you can develop a beautiful star schema off of a bunch of data, like I'm like that is beautiful, like that is art. Like put that in a poster behind me on the wall, right?
Yeah. I also recently saw a post about how someone was talking about how software in general is inherently a creative area of expertise. And it really made me think and kind of like rethink how I approach things sometimes, and how I approach just general tasks and I guess the broader picture of what my job is as well. So that's another benefit of like being connected to the data industry and like the people that are bringing up different ideas and new ways to think about things.
Yeah, yeah, and I think especially analytics engineering, but like you get the opportunity basically where you get like the blank canvas of the raw data, and then you get to kind of draw that picture how you think is best to draw it, which I think is it can be frustrating sometimes, right? Like it can be tough. It can there's obviously better days, better and worse days of that, but I think that like gives a spark to like the job that other jobs and other career paths like don't have, where like you basically get to have this blank canvas and get to draw it and go on your path. And as long as you can justify your path, you get to go on your own way, which I think is really cool. So yeah, that's something like I think we might have read the same article, but like basically where it's just like engineers, like software engineers, and obviously the technical people that are coding on a normal basis, like you get the opportunity to like be creative, and you like in certain jobs, right? I mean, obviously there's some places you don't get to be creative, but I think as an analytics engineer, like you have to be creative, or else you're never going to get the things done that you need to, right? And then on the other side of things, so obviously if I ask you what your favorite thing is about your job, I have to ask what your least favorite thing is about the job. I know we've been super positive about analytics engineering so far, but like I think it's a great job. Like I love working in DBT. I love making models, and obviously you do too. But if say that someone was like on the edge of like choosing between being an analytics engineer and like maybe going to be a BI analyst or something like that, what would you say is probably your least favorite part of the job?
Yeah, this is a tough one. Because it really, really just would depend on the person. So like me in my current life right now, I think that I fit analytics engineering like perfectly where I am in my life. So it's hard to say what I like about it the least because it's the job that I've liked the most that I've ever had. Maybe I'm still in the honeymoon phase, but I I really had a hard time thinking of something. But I will say that it if I do come to a point in my life where I want to work more in the technical realm, or if I want to work more with people, and I do work a lot with people, but if I would rather like be bringing that direct impact of reporting, then that would be something that I would probably like less about this job, and just try to start to move closer to that area of interest that I decided that I wanted to do at that point. But yeah, it is like just knowing like that balance, and right now I think analytics engineering is that perfect balance for me. So it's hard to answer that question.
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, it is. I think that's a really like cool way of looking at the analytics engineering is that, whenever I was being a data scientist and I was leaning more, towards like a data engineer at that point in my career, I was not really talking to anyone on a daily basis. Like it was like heads down, like hand on the keyboard, like for 8 hours a day, like might have a meeting or two a day, maybe, but probably not. And then like I was a BI analyst before that, and like that was like a lot of talking to people, a lot of talking to stakeholders, a lot of figuring out what they want. So I think what you said is a really cool way of looking at analytics engineering, where it's like a nice middle ground where it's like you're not like directly reporting to a stakeholder per se. It's like you're not having to do that every single day, but you do have to do that to understand what the context for the model. And then you also get to code a lot of your day, right? So it's like a nice middle ground between kind of like the super technical job and then the super social job, where you're like right in the middle, where you could kind of get to do both. So yeah, it's It's a cool way of looking at it. Maybe there is not a bad part about being an analytics engineer. Like maybe we have proved it out here today that is the career that everyone should go into in the data world.
I think that's the takeaway we should take from this conversation.